Okay, hi everyone. A very live streamy day today. This is another design review. This is our language completeness and consistency review for things that are hopefully making it into version 13 of Wolfram language. First up today is context aliases. Okay, this is a cool feature. Let's see how it's working. All right. So, okay, so this is, what is $context aliases?
Right, it's an
What?
association, so you can extract a key by, right. So
So
it
wait a minute.
says need.
Oh, I see. I see. So needs.
Right, the needs create that rule form of needs creates a context alias.
That's nice. That's really nice.
And so
So let's say if I say $context aliases, okay, I'll have that.
Yep.
And then if I were to edit $context aliases, I can remove an alias, right?
Yep.
Or you can add more.
Right. Okay,
Right.
why is the syntax coloring not working here?
That's under current limitations.
So the basic issue is that the front end and the kernel are not communicating about the state of $context aliases like they do about the state of variables. And so for the front end to get better information, it would have to actively query the kernel in a way that would draw down performance.
So wait a second. I mean, we have plenty of things where when you reset them, they cause something to go off to the kernel and so on.
Yeah,
I'm not saying, I don't think John meant to say that this is impossible. I'm just saying that it is work that needs to be done and will likely not be done for 13.
I mean, the issue here is that you need change in kernel state to automatically update the front end.
I know, but don't we do that for $context?
No.
How do we make things red and so on?
So the redness mostly comes from the that we have this symbol information, so that we know.
Right, but we do need to know what the current value of $context path is. So there is some sort of state information that's traveled between the front end and kernel, but maybe that's part of the existing symbol information. I don't remember exactly what's in this.
I don't remember for sure if it is or not, but mostly the front end it changes the active $context and $context path for context isolation purposes. But I don't think that
I'm pretty sure it knows.
Memory is a little fuzzy on this. But,
I'm pretty sure it knows. But look, in this case, it's got to know. And so, that's the thing we got to solve. We may not be able to solve it immediately, but it's something we got to solve.
Well, I mean, we've been spending a lot of time just nailing the basics here. So this
fine.
is,
I mean, that's fine. So, I mean,
this is why I wrote it as current limitations. I mean,
yeah, okay, fine.
But yes, you'll find.
Yes, that's an issue. That's an issue with forcing symbol completion. Wow, that's not very useful. Right. So this is going to be, as a practical matter, people are not going to use this as much as they might until those things are fixed, until completion works and until syntax coloring works. And it's even going to look ugly in code because there's going to be a lot of blue stuff there. Unreasonably blue. Okay.
No,
but anyway.
well, keep in mind, the blue is tracking kernel state. You see blue a lot anyway.
I know, but you don't for things that are defined.
When you haven't actually evaluated the code.
I know. I'm telling you, people will not be that thrilled with this until it auto-completes and turns black. But I understand that's a thing that isn't done yet. But it's like we can't rest until that's done, so to speak.
Right, but
okay. So let's hold on. Oh boy. I agree. I think if the alias is not pulled in, like if the file isn't found, if no file matching that, to match that alias is found, I don't think it should create that.
I think you mean context.
Yes, sorry. Wait a minute. This isn't the right way around. This is.
Oh, did I? I wrote it backwards.
Okay, fine.
My apologies.
Okay. All right. Okay. So, I mean, if the context cannot be retrieved because the file isn't found, don't make the aliasing.
Right.
How should we load a package without adding it to context path or adding an alias?
Right. So suppose you just want to make the code available, but you don't want to modify, right? If you just call the normal needs, it adds it to $context path.
Is that a default function of needs?
Yes.
Yes.
That's how it's worked since version 1.
Well,
and documented that way.
Yeah, okay, fine.
If you look through code, you see all sorts of people working around it.
Oh gosh. Why don't they just use get? Oh, because they want to get the why don't they use get of find file?
They don't want to do it repeatedly.
Right. Needs will only get it if the context hasn't already been created. So, right. So we have force load now, and we have auto load and add the context path, but we don't have auto load.
All right. So basically what you're saying, sorry, I'm sorry. What you're saying is needs of foo arrow none puts nothing in there. Foo arrow automatic would put foo itself as the prefix that you have to use. Is that right? Or is automatic mean add it to the context path?
Right now, I believe none and automatic behave the same way. I mean, you could try it out with.
Well, but so what you're saying is, when there's an aliasing here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, I understand. So there's cases, the following cases. In a sense, the case that is working right now is needs of foo arrow and then a null string in some sense, where I mean a null string artistically, because basically what we're saying there is that you don't have to put any contextual prefix before the symbol, right? Because that thing is on the context path.
Yes, exactly.
So what this is saying is, okay. So it could be the case that automatic means, okay, so there are two meanings that we can imagine for automatic. One is you have to put foo explicitly, but maybe that always works and there's no reason to even say that.
Right.
You can't prevent that working.
Exactly.
So then automatic would mean.
I'm not sure that there's another sense that we need for automatic. Right, because we have the just string case, which is load and add the context path. And then there's the string goes to string, which is load and add context alias. And now the third case is load and don't add context.
No, I
alias,
understand. I'm just trying to give a conceptual thing. If it's automatic means load it. I'm just trying to make more sense out of, rather than having this very weird pointy thing of just the none case.
I see.
So then automatic would mean add it to the context path. None means it's not added to the context path. And D mean, or alias means add the alias somehow to the context path.
Well, you add it to $context aliases.
I understand that, but that means the access to the thing. Wait a minute, you can still access it as foo backtick, but you can always do that.
Right.
You can always do that. So
right.
That's it.
Right. So the intended goal, right, is that we have, publisher ID, backtick, package repository backtick, my package, which is super long and annoying to type, but you don't necessarily want all these different packlet repository packages conflicting with each other. So you add, load this package arrow, my short alias, and then I just type alias backtick everything instead of super long context.
Yeah, right.
So the concrete example is if git link is in the packlet repo under the publisher ID Wolfram, then you might do needs Wolfram backtick git link backtick arrow GL backtick.
Mm-hmm. Okay. GL backtick. Do you need the backtick?
Yes.
In the alias? Why would you need that?
Well, we spec'd it that way for consistency.
I think we should, as a courtesy, if they don't give a backtick, I think we should add it. Any objection?
We certainly shouldn't do that if you're manually modifying $context aliases.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. $context aliases.
Yeah.
That seems weird to me. We have a notion of a context, and we always write it with a backtick. And here, there's a context. I don't see why we don't want to just do it the same way everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
I think it's the preferred embodiment.
We don't do it for the left-hand side of that rule, right? You have to include the
well, yeah, because otherwise it's a file name. The truth is, with the arrow syntax, we could do it. We could drop it on the left as well. It's not ambiguous. Look, I minorly think it's worthwhile. I think you guys will want it at some point, but I don't care right now.
Okay.
Okay, so none means don't add it to the context path. Automatic means the behavior that you see right now from needs, and a specific alias means add that alias, make it according to that alias. Okay.
Yep.
Ignore context aliases. Should information.
Right. So if you look at the documentation of names, right, there are these ignore case and spelling correction options that we currently don't support in information. Right. So and you can try this right now in that notebook, right? You could do names of d backtick star, and you'll get all the developer context symbols.
Okay.
But you could also do names d backtick star, ignore aliases goes to true. Right, so you get lots and lots of symbols. Now, if you add the option ignore context aliases goes to true, well, it's reddening because we haven't defuturized the documentation yet.
What does ignore mean? Oh, ignore as in discard context aliases. That's the wrong sense of ignore.
Okay.
Ignore case means I want it, as an equivalence class of, equivalence classing those cases. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
No, this is not ignore. And in fact, to the contrary, it's.
Well, it depends on which way you're looking at it. If you're looking at it as something that's looking in the symbol table, this is saying don't also look at.
It's saying don't resolve context aliases.
Right.
So it's more like resolve context aliases, arrow true or false.
Okay. Yeah, I would be okay with that, right? We'd need to negate the sense for the name, but that seems perfectly fine to me. Chris, John, any objections, thoughts on that point?
I think the reason that I chose ignore case was ignore context aliases was because I was doing something like ignore case. Is it names that has ignore case?
Yes.
No, names just look.
Right.
It's
But
equivalency
it's the
together.
opposite.
Yeah.
Capital and lowercase a. That's what it means. Whereas here, it's either you turn that D backtick into, you either resolve context aliases or you don't, and you insist that they have to be actual context, so to speak.
Exactly.
I'm just worrying, okay, my worry here is the name resolve context aliases. I could imagine that we'd need a function that is called that goes from, I mean, in other words, if I have D backtick packed array Q, is there any way in which how would I get the resolved version of that?
You would just evaluate it on its own. I don't know that there's a stringy way.
Well, string would be names, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay, fine. All right. Resolve context aliases are true or false seems fine to me. Default is true. Default is that you are resolving context aliases, right? So you can use them, right?
Right. So we're adding this to names, to contexts, to information. And so then I noticed, well, names has these two extra options, the spelling correction and the ignore cases, that information does not have. And so I
probably should have those. It should probably get added. I've got another case, which is the symbol. Don't we want to ignore? Do we want, wait a minute. What do we want to do?
That evaluates
symbol.
That evaluates. So I don't think it obviously will resolve.
No, if you say symbol of D backtick packed array Q, why does that resolve?
It becomes it evaluates. It becomes a symbol in it. Right.
Well, I think this was
but wait a minute. How could you have a D backtick which does not resolve the context alias? If I have a context called D, can I get, that's when I want to try to get to it.
You cannot. And if you try to create a context, so I think this is partly discussed in some of the next points, but basically it's, it disallows, you get a warning if you create a context alias that shadows an existing context with symbols.
In the case of resolve context aliases, I don't understand what it can possibly do. If you say don't resolve context aliases, there's nothing to find. It'll just come up back blank because it doesn't find the raw D backtick whatever.
Right. I mean, I guess our thinking was in the symbol case, we could possibly add that option. But I mean, certainly we want the default behavior to be, symbol blah is no different from typing that thing in.
I agree. The default should be that, right? But I'm trying to understand. If D is a context on its own, you're saying it is forever shadowed by the alias. Is that correct?
Yes, until you remove the alias.
I have so many shadows of the SMP syntax modification function.
Well, and keep in mind that oftentimes the way that you will use context alias is in a scoped fashion. So if you declare a context alias inside of a begin end block, when you hit the end block, it's going to revert changes to $context aliases.
Okay, you didn't say that here, but yes, okay. I didn't know that about begin end. And hopefully in the new package scheme, it'll be even sleeker in the way that it does that.
I would hope so, but I can't directly speak to that.
Okay. Both adding an alias to context path, context aliases, and creating an alias which is equal to a member of context path.
Right. So I think this, right. So this is the issue of clashes between things. So we put in the rule that, well, I guess this started with, context aliases are aliases. They're pointers to context. They're not context themselves. So we shouldn't add them. You shouldn't set them as $context, and you shouldn't add them to $context path. And, partly, that's just sort of, because type mismatch, and also partly you run into interpretation issues.
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want that. We just want them in context aliases as opposed to context path.
Exactly. Right. And so, and then earlier iterate, and I think then there's the second question of, well, suppose you already have something on $context path, and then you add a context alias, which is equal to one of those entries on $context path. Should that also be disallowed? And my viewpoint was absolutely. That's just basic consistency. Now, Chris Cooley had some objection to that, which I can't really articulate.
I think you can currently, you can overwrite, right? I mean, context, if you set the context alias, if you use a context alias, even your needs is not going to fail. Just because you have a context called D, your needs blah arrow D will not fail, right? It'll just create a context alias. Let me say that again. Let's say there is a context out there called D. It may or may not be on context path. Okay. You say needs blah arrow D. You're going to create a context alias called D.
Correct.
Whether or not there was already a context called D, and whether or not it was on context path. Therefore, what I think should happen is that if you try and add to context aliases something which is already on context path, I think it should give a warning but work. That's what I think.
And does it shadow?
Yes, because that's what it does in this case.
And then my next question is, suppose the existing D is there because it was added to the system, and there's some system function that's going to call D backtick some important function. Then because that system function was loaded before this needs with the alias, it will still be calling the correct important function, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Because
pausing is already over.
Right. Contexts are only resolved at symbol creation time. So once you've hit Shift Enter and the expression is parsed, you're done. And so if the definitions were created, we don't go around and start changing the symbol table. That's sort of the whole point.
Yep. Perfect. Just wanted to confirm.
That way lies madness.
Yeah. Okay. Should we disallow aliases that match a strict subset of $context? I don't see why. I don't understand why we would do that. Oh my God, what is this?
This is...
oh my God!
We don't necessarily need to go through all of these. This is just,
this is not an agenda. This is Chris's carefully curated set of, all sorts of edge cases and principles and things like that.
We spent probably half a dozen meetings resolving these things so that you wouldn't have to.
Right.
You're welcome.
I mean, this is there in case.
Yes.
This list is there. So should we need to refer to any of these things, I have one of Chris's nicely curated examples handy. This was not something we were intending to go through.
You got a big list for possible issues, at least.
Yeah.
You should. This may be the longest possible issues section in the whole documentation.
Yeah, I don't think these are all possible issues, but yes, I mean these.
My head is spinning. I'm not going to look at these unless you think there's one I should.
No, you don't need to.
No,
but let me just ask, Chris, is there a decision that has been made so far in this meeting that you don't agree with?
Well, no, but there's just that last question. I don't think we completely resolved it because there was kind of, if you scroll up, there was like that last. All right, so that was. Yeah, so we decided that like, you know, we are going to allow creating an alias which matches something that's already on $context path, and I guess $context. But then there's also that other issue where, you know, we're setting $context, or, you know, to something or adding something to $context path, and you know, the question is, right now we disallow adding an alias or a subcontext of an alias. And the question is just, you know, is that the right behavior, or do we just want to match?
Disallow,
alias?
disallow adding to context what we said before is we will disallow the adding of a context that conflicts with an existing context alias, correct?
Well,
Or adding to context
Yeah.
path something which is an existing context alias. I mean,
right,
you're already
and
going to get confused if you had a context out there, d backtick, and now you create a context alias, and then you say d backtick, and you thought you were going to get the off context path usage of that thing, but it's not the off context path usage. It's instead the on context alias usage. See what I'm saying? You see the scenario?
Yeah, and that's the other
Well,
scenario where yeah.
right. Well, yes. So that is something, right, that we just need, right. So you do get a warning if you add a context alias that clashes with an existing context. You do get a warning that says, you know, the original context will be shadowed until you remove this context alias.
Okay, so any context, whether or not it's in context path.
Right. Then what we specifically prohibit is adding a context alias to the context to $context path, or setting it as $context.
Right, so that's the other way around. So that's saying
that's a more restricted thing. Then there's also the question of the other way around.
No, look, if you type in d backtick whatever, you're going to get the okay, a symbol that doesn't exist already. Okay, a new symbol, new. I've done a context alias for d backtick. Now I type d backtick new equals 7. That will resolve, because it will resolve the context alias to develop a backtick new equals 7, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the case you're talking about is you have a context alias and you want to add to context path something which you will never ever see because it will always be shadowed by the context alias, correct?
Correct.
Right, so that's why you want
may or may not exist even, right?
Well, that's fine, but I mean, but point is, you'll never see it because you add it to context path, thinking you're going to get this context, but no, you're not, because it's going to be grabbed. That sequence of characters is going to be grabbed by context alias.
Well, if you add it to context path and the symbol, and you can reference existing symbols in that context, right? That's the point of being on $context path.
Yeah. By the way, what happens if you say foo arrow foo in the needs? It'll just be happy. I mean, will it enter that as a context alias, or will it just say, be happy, I don't need it as an alias?
Well,
it'll enter it as an alias currently.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And aliases can only be one level deep, so it'll only work if it's a one level deep context.
All right, so look, the sub-alias, the subcontext thing, I don't understand the significance of that.
So Chris, do you have an example about that here? Right, because we replaced the leading thing, right? So if you do d backtick a backtick x, then you'll get developer backtick a backtick x.
Oh, I see.
So that is why Chris.
Can you? But you can't alias the d. I'm sorry, the a. You can't alias the a.
Correct.
But you could alias the d backtick a backtick.
Yes.
Not at the moment.
What's that?
I mean, it's only kind of like implicitly alias because of the fact that you have an alias from D to something else, but you can't have an alias called D backtick A backtick for various other
Okay,
reasons,
but what
You
about
can alias
saying something-
developer backtick A.
No, what about the dev backtick foo backtick goes to df? Can I do that?
Yes.
Yes.
yeah, that's fine because
Well-
the alias itself is just one level deep.
Right. So aliases cannot be multi-level aliases right now. By the way,
Correct.
notice how I didn't put the backtick on that second thing. I'm telling you, you should let people do that. Should let people not put the backtick. Anyway, I mean, okay. I mean, the main point is that you don't allow people to you allow people to peel off the front, but you don't allow people to kind of give second level aliases for the, the foo here. In other words, you can alias dev foo, but you can't alias foo on its own. That seems right.
Yep. Right.
Okay.
And the point is, right, if after you did this, you did, df backtick A backtick X, then you'd get dev foo A X.
Exactly.
And so then the question is, given that you can potentially be rewriting, sort of the front of a context, that was the motivation to disallow the, not just or at least warn about not just things that are on context path, but also,
Yes.
subcontexts.
I think we should warn.
Okay.
Right. Well, good work here. Anytime somebody's
So
worked
are
out
we warning
this
for both
and-
directions? Just one last question: are we warning for both directions, or by directions I mean if you're adding an alias to $context, is that disallowed or warned, versus the other versus adding an alias that's already on $context path? I think we decided that's warned, but is the other direction also just warned?
Wasn't there one we said we disallow previously for one level context? What was the case we said we disallow?
Adding a context alias to an existing context alias to $context path.
Right, because it will be a guaranteed shadow.
Right.
So is there any case here where it's a guaranteed shadow? Okay, if there is, disallow it. If there isn't, don't.
Okay.
No, just one.
Okay. Do you want to take a look at the ref page at all?
I'll look at it. This is mostly on needs, right?
No, it's on $context aliases.
$context aliases.
Yeah, but we need to update needs.
Yes, but I didn't want to do all that work until we made all the fundamental decisions. So I forgot to commit the latest version of this, so there's some bootstrapping stuff in here that will go away.
Fine. I mean, this looks fine.
Yeah.
Perfectly sensible.
Yeah. But yes, I will touch all of the other things, names, symbol.
Why are you doing this, John? It's wonderful public service, but why exactly are you doing it?
I'm the one who came up with the core design, and I'm the one who pushed for this problem to be solved in the first place.
Okay, well, good for you. I just love it if you could delegate
I mean,
it.
I will also be doing a portion of that. It's not all falling to John.
Okay.
Is that Python inspired, John?
It does come from Python, but it also comes from JavaScript. JavaScript does something very similar.
I see.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, it is.
All right. I mean, one question about it is the standardization of, whether we should actually say and this is a question for Packlets and things like that, whether they should say a typical shortening is blah, blah, blah. That might be helpful to people.
I think that'll happen.
Actually, that reminds me of one thing that I wanted to bring up, which is that, we have this convention, and I don't know if this convention is actually written down anywhere, but nearly everyone seems to follow it, that context names typically have initial caps. We might want to promote a convention that context aliases typically don't have initial caps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
We've all been using that in our examples and thinking.
Right. So just use the examples that way. And we can make some comment, but nobody's going to read it in the context aliases documentation. If we have a workflow about context aliases, we can talk about it there. All right. Well done. Looks very good, guys. All right. So on to the next topic, I think. So people who were here for context aliases are welcome to drop out, or they can stay and hear about MatrixForm.
Okay. I assume you probably won't need me for anything else, so I'll drop out.
Right. Okay.
Bye.
So this is making this a more like a rodent. Linear algebra more like a rodent.
Can you guys update to me? I mean, this was triggered in an LCC meeting before, which I wasn't at, so I don't really know the background.
Yeah, I don't know that there was a lot of background to this. It was just something that.
Why the hell does transpose not work through MatrixForm? That's weird.
Because it works, it's not a linear algebra function. It works on lists. It works on associations. It
Nobody's
works on
ever going to
combinations.
understand that. Nobody's ever going to understand that.
Right, which is why I think making things rodentify, go through MatrixForm is just wrong.
No, we have the technical term rodentify.
Fine.
What does that mean?
Be like a rodent, gnawing through things to get.
Okay, I got it.
Right. So, I think modifying MatrixForm or modifying things to go through MatrixForm is the wrong thing.
Well, are you saying that the ones down below here have just been made to work or have worked for millions of years?
There exists a branch which may not even be in the prototype build, which makes them work by sort of, modifying the sort of is this a matrix that can be eaten by linear algebra functions?
All right, fine.
Identify.
Okay, so the people who are most keen on this are the people doing elementary math. So are they represented here? The Wayne crowd and people like that.
I think that there are lots of people that are keen on this, particularly if we have an updated MatrixForm that scales a little, scales pretty well. But I don't see how we can do it without having a matrix type. That's the thing. It's like, because we can have lists of lists that can be matrices, but are not matrices.
Well, I mean, this is like having a sparse array where things go sparse to sparse in many cases, but don't guarantee to go sparse to sparse. They might desparsify.
Right. And so I am suggesting what we need, and this was actually Rob's suggestion, which I think is a good one, is we need a new type of structured array, which basically can have any type of data inside of it, but is, formats in MatrixForm always. And then sort of.
Oh, boy. A term that I've often used with Tom is, the pumps are starting up. The ship is sinking. We're adding more and more pumps to kind of keep the water out.
No, I think it's a little bit, the timing is not quite right to have that, but that would work. But the main thing, the name is not the right thing. I mean, it's the framework name is what that is. That could work. I mean, that would work.
I mean, you're saying a thing called matrix, basically.
Basically.
Which is something that formats as a matrix. It walks and talks like a matrix. It has part extraction like a matrix.
Absolutely.
It does transpose like a matrix. It just happens to format not as, you can treat it just like lists of lists, but it formats differently as a courtesy, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting concept. I mean, I think that will become a lot easier when the compiler is used in more places.
Well, that too. This fits. That's structure array fits with a compiler.
All right. I think this is a future thing then.
Right. Yeah. I'm just saying, you know, I mean, if you look at my example of the contradiction, like we can't make matrix Q of a matrix form thing return true, right? That would just
listen. It's too early. Roger is right. This is not a thing for right now.
Okay.
It won't be too far, but we need to just progress a little bit, and I think it's going to be possible, and we're going to have a very constructive discussion.
And I would wonder if it should be restricted to rank 2, or is it already not?
We can have that discussion.
Yeah, let's have that discussion.
Because there's a lot of things. MatrixForm itself, I think, is pretty old. I'm guessing from version 1.
It is.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things needed for it. So.
Well, which we could put into MatrixForm itself, but
absolutely we can. Absolutely we can. But if it's going to be showcased a zillion times, if we want it good.
Yeah, right. Well, for sure. But I mean, even things like band matrices, I don't think they format in a special way. Blah 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 blah. There are lots of things that should be done better in MatrixForm. MatrixForm was built at a time when we didn't expect to.
But for instance, here's super simple things. The way that numbers format in MatrixForm makes them look very ugly in our system. And much more primitive system makes numeric matrices look clean.
Yeah.
Other use cases that you have in elementary math is you often want to highlight pieces of a matrix, like a row or column or a submatrix or entry.
Yeah.
So the pretty basic things, and then
you're saying like MatrixForm having the number precisions agree and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
we didn't worry about that.
Right,
a third of a century we did not worry about that.
Right, and how was it? Yeah, the other thing is that one can do is to make it degrade gracefully when you deal with bigger matrices. By aligning things, for instance. We have to do a bunch of experiments, but it would be nice if it didn't sort of just not work particularly well.
Right. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, and I mean, about sort of the vector, and I mean, I explicitly addressed the vector and elementary user case, right? If we had a constructor, right, you could say head of, something vector Q, comma, row matrix, or I guess column matrix would have been
like we do it. Okay.
Let's not get into this.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that we have coming up for? There was something that I just sent along to LCC about.
Find fit. Rob should be here, so we can have that conversation about.
Well, I mean, look. The basic point is, I am absolutely fed up with. I want a fit, and I want the fit. Right, I don't want.
So I'm going to have to run here in a minute. But for distributions, we did two things. There is estimated distribution that gives you the object, the distribution, and there's find distribution parameters that give you the rules. Parameter goes to value. Yeah. So we did two things.
Right. Well, maybe we need an estimated fit or an estimated, something which is.
Why just not add an additional argument to find fit?
Yes, that could work too.
Well, we could certainly do that to begin with. I mean,
what we did recently was we added properties to fit that allowed you to get out the values or the rules or the this or the that, and maybe find fit could do something similar.
Right.
Well, okay. So the issue is this: I want to do.
That's what we were talking about. Properties, Rob. Like this.
Yeah, right. So I mean, the issue is this. The issue is this. It drives me absolutely frigging crazy that I go a plus bx here. I say ab x dandy. Okay, I get that out. I don't want to get that out. I want to get 2 plus bx.
Yeah, sure. You want to get your model function, but fit used to only give the model function, which is really useless if you wanted to actually get the parameter values. So that's why we added the property. So I think properties is the way to do this.
Why does this say fit?
Well, fit only does linear fits.
And I think you gave it too many arguments.
You need to give something like 1, x, x, list of 1, x.
Yeah, well, okay, but so that's a really primitive thing, which we also need to fix.
Well, we have to some extent. We've
No, we haven't. We made another function.
No, go to
Well,
fit.
find fit is
we
another
updated
function
it.
that does that.
It's
But you
been
can also
somewhat
give it
updated.
matrices and
See the prop case there?
Right. So
Well, I never used that. I've never used
Well,
that.
it's new.
new.
So if this is a linear fit, so I want to do an exponential, for example.
Right. So we're just saying, fine, we need that same argument. I mean, to the extent
If
that
this
these
had a
properties
best
make
fit
sense
argument
for fit.
here, then
Right.
I would be a happy camper for the time being.
that's what we're proposing. Yeah.
Okay, let's do that right now. That should be very easy. Let's get that to happen, and that way, and that's useful too. Best fit pure function. That seems useful too.
Yeah. So we'll do a similar proposal, and we'll.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Great.
By the way, fit has been highly modernized with regularization. It has all this advanced regularization.
It's become a fitter fit.
It's yeah, exactly.
Yes, somewhat.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Well, I mean, so does it take weighted data and things?
Yes.
Doesn't say that here. Doesn't say that anywhere here.
Well, let's see. I can't remember how you put the weights in, but
Well,
yes,
but you should just be able to say weighted data.
Yeah, should say weighted data, right?
Yeah.
Let's go back and check on that, Rob, and then make sure we actually document
yeah,
it.
I think I'm pretty sure it takes weights, but
I gotta run.
Okay. See you guys. Okay. Thanks. And see you all later. Bye for now.
Hey, Brett, do you have a minute to join my Zoom?